Hi all, Eric here. If you've been wondering to yourself, how do I keep up with all the changes going on in the world, in career and in business? Well, forget just keeping up. This episode is all about how to adapt and produce new outcomes so that you stay competitive and produce competitive outcomes going forward into the future. If you've been watching me for any time at all, you know I like to fire up the rearview mirror on expectations whenever it is I think we're relying a little too heavily on how things have always been done in the past. And today is no exception. If we draw too heavily from how things have always been done in the past, we're going to be too rigid in our thinking. And the downside of being too rigid is a lot like this bridge. This is a real bridge in Honduras. And what you're going to notice is at one point, there was actually a river, and it was right there under the bridge. But after some hurricanes, you'll notice the river is now here. And that's a lot like things that are changing in our career and in our business. We can't afford to be rigid in our thinking like the bridge was. If we go back to expectations for our career, it was a lot like a 100-yard dash. That's to say, you could actually start your career, work hard throughout, and cross the finish line into success and retire. Or in business, maybe you could start at the starting line, work really hard to offer the same thing over and over and over again, and maybe you could have been successful at the end. But no more. It doesn't work like that. Because instead of being like a 100-yard dash, our careers and our businesses are much more like a complex 400-meter relay, where there's all kinds of coordination and skills and handoffs and an ever-evolving continuous loop of changing that's going on right now. So we can't rely anymore on expectations for how things have always been done. Instead, we need to start focusing on setting NēXTpectations for how things are going to be going forward. And nothing helps us set NēXTpectations like understanding strategy. And that's what we're going to talk about in this episode today. I'm all about setting NēXTpectations in life, finance, career, and business. If you like how that sounds and haven't already, make sure to hit subscribe and make sure you hit the alerts to be notified whenever new videos like this come out. All right, today we're going to light up career and business. And as we work through strategy, I'm going to share with you the components of a strategy, actually in a topic that I do in keynote and virtual keynote sessions, where I talk about the taxonomy of a strategy. What are the different parts that make up a strategy? My hope is to enable you to start thinking better about strategy and how to craft it, create it, and compete with it to get unstuck and get ahead in your career and business. So at the end of the day, a strategy is just a fancy word from how to get from wherever you're at to where it is you want to go. Which brings us to the first part of what it is I've found most helpful to define when you're crafting a strategy. The first part that I always think is most important is why. Why this strategy? Why this plan for getting from where you're at to where you want to go? And the better you know your why, the better your strategy is going to be. In fact, if you don't know your why, you don't have a strategic objective. And if you don't have a strategic objective, you're going to have a little bit of a problem. Maybe you've heard of Alice in Wonderland, the famous story by Lewis Carroll. Lewis Carroll has a quote that I think summarizes the importance of having the why or the strategic objective in your plan. If you don't know where you're going, then any road will get you there. Well then, if any road will get you there, it's because you don't have a strategic objective. Or said another way, you set the strategic objective, your why, so that you know which road you got to take. Maybe you don't know how to get there today, but you'll certainly know whether you're off course because you'll see you're not progressing to that outcome. But only if you define the outcome. You set the why or the strategic objective, the object of the strategy, as a destination. When you set it, it becomes clear not any road will do. And that's the important part, is that when you know where you're trying to get to, then you know how to measure progress. Is it getting you closer or isn't it? So that way you can scrap the plan if it's not working out right and put in a new plan. There are a few things you should know about the strategic objective. First off, they nest, which means that they sit inside each other. You may have an objective that's for a certain project at work, but that might sit inside an objective you have for your job in general, which might be an objective you had for how to get ahead in your career overall, which might sit inside an objective for how much you want to earn so that you can save and invest for your retirement in your future, and so on and so on. So just remember, it's not like you have one strategic objective. You may have many, and it may be that you have to create a strategy for how to get to one before you can get to another. And so it might be that you have a strategy after this strategy. So how do you know that this why is aiming in the right direction for the next strategy you want to produce? And this is really important. I find sometimes people only go one deep in their strategic objective, but I find it's much better to align them so that the next one and the next one and the next one can be fulfilled. So how do you test what your next objective is? Or if you're listening to somebody else say, hey, I'm intending to do this thing, and you want to test the why, then what I use is what I call the so that test. The so that test is just like it sounds. Whenever I'm working on a plan to produce some sort of outcome, I always ask myself, so that what? Like I imagine for a moment I already achieved whatever it is I said I wanted to achieve, and then I start to answer the question, so that I can do what? What new capabilities will I have? What will that enable me to do moving forward that I couldn't before? To make sure that whatever I pick for this strategic objective lines up with the next one I want to produce after, so that I don't waste all that time. I also don't like people around me wasting a lot of time, resource, or energy, or even getting frustrated when they head towards something they didn't mean to. So I always use that so that test. I also can sometimes use the so that test to make sure that people even have a strategic objective to begin with. Hey, I'd like to do this thing. So that what? And I listen for the answer. It's a great way to make sure that people are being really purposeful with their strategies. The third thing I want to say about strategic objectives is something that I call watch out for vanity outcomes as opposed to sanity outcomes. What I mean by that is, well, let me give you an example in business. Oftentimes what I hear, even on our own teams or in other companies that I work with, is that they'll sometimes talk about revenues like that's the thing. They'll say, this is our revenue goal. Well, that's great. Do you also have a profit goal? Because revenues alone aren't enough. Let me prove the point. If you wanted just to have a lot of revenues, then all you'd really have to do is go out there and start selling a lot of dollar bills for only 50 cents. You'll get a lot of takers. The revenues will be incredibly high. The profits will not. So make sure when you're focused on different objectives and different outcomes that you're not doing the vanity ones, you're doing the ones that make sense, the sanity outcomes. The second example I'll offer you of vanity outcomes versus sanity outcomes is what I call ego versus outcomes. I know to offer you this one because I've done it a few times myself and learned the hard way. If you set objectives, your strategic objectives, around your ego, you may find you work really hard for outcomes you didn't mean to produce. And in this case, when I was much younger and far more naive than I am today, I remember setting one of my business objectives in my marketing services company to win all of these different awards, like this one, the Stevie Award, which is apparently like the Academy Awards of Business according to the New York Post at the time. Well, I won this great award. They even had this incredible little moment where you walked up on stage and gave a speech just like the Academy Awards. It felt so good. The problem is that once I won this award, I didn't have a strategic objective for why I had it. I didn't pass the so that test. I want to win this award so that what? And I was just doing it for ego. I had won a bunch of awards, but in fact, it didn't do anything for me. I wanted the awards because I thought they were really cool. I figured winning all these awards would be kind of like, but instead it was much more like, what I had to do to recover it is I had to create a plan or a set of objectives on actual outcomes, not ego. Once I finally put that together, I said, oh, you know what? I can create some new marketing. And we relaunched our website and we started promoting the awards that we were getting as a way to build trust and value and identity out in the marketplace for our marketing services company that significantly impacted revenues. When I started making the objective about what that award could produce in our business, it started really helping, like this one here where recognition, we sold awards and trophies personalized for different events at the time. And people that are interested in recognition might want to know that we were recognized. And so I was able to tie that in to build more credibility that they should get their awards from us because we were award winners ourselves. But until I did those extra measures to actually take it out of ego, the vanity outcomes, and instead focus on the sanity outcomes, I wasn't going to do anything much with those. And I want to help you avoid that trap as well, because you can work really hard and spend a lot of time and money on things that are about ego and not produce the necessary outcomes in your strategy. At the end of the day, when you're setting your strategic objectives, make sure you check your ego at the door. And those are three really important things that I had to learn the hard way when setting my strategic objectives, and hopefully that will shortcut your success by not having to experience them quite as painfully as I had to in learning them on my own. So the strategic objective is arguably the most important part of your entire strategy, but it's not the only part. In fact, this line right here represents most of the other parts, which is how. How are you going to get there? So if this first one was the strategic objective, when we're talking about the how, that's what we call the actual strategic plan. And while there's a lot of fuss that can go into how a strategic plan can come together, the building blocks, the actual steps themselves, I call W by Ws, or what by whens. In fact, you may have seen my episode of what by when on YouTube. If you haven't, be sure and check that out. These what by whens are actually the tactics. So whenever you hear the relationship of a strategy and tactics, the tactics are the actual steps of action you take to get to that strategic objective. And now you've got the taxonomy of the components that make up a full strategy. 1, the strategic objective. 2, the strategic plan. And inside that, all the what by whens, the tactics that are going to advance the actions like steps, just like I have here, on your way to that strategic objective. Okay, special bonus. Now that you've got the parts or the taxonomy of a strategy in mind, let me share with you 3 power categories of strategy that I found immensely helpful in accelerating my competitive advantage in business initiatives. Now keep in mind, I do trainings and virtual and keynote presentations on these categories, and they run super deep. Today for this video, I'm just going to give you a surface level, what I call a skipping stones version of these particular categories. Enough for you to really have an understanding of their importance, and then if you want to go deeper in them, you can do that offline outside the video. All right, let's light up the first one, competitive strategy. Here what we're aiming for is competitive advantage. The problem is that most people are aiming their strategies at being the best at something. And intuitively, that sounds like a great idea. We're going to be the best in whatever it is in your industry. And it sounds like a good idea until you realize there can only be one at the top. One can be the best, which means in order to be successful at beating the best, you've got to dethrone the other one that's the best. And everyone starts spending all this time, energy, and resource in trying to be in that one slot. That's what we call a zero-sum game, or Z-sum for short. The problem with that race is if only one can be the best and you've got to take from that one to create that zero-sum game and be successful, usually the race is a race to the bottom, and the thing that actually ends up being the big differentiator is just price. And so unless you want to be in a race to the bottom on price, then striving to be the best is not a competitive strategy. Instead, if one's trying to produce competitive advantage or competitive strategy, the thing to be after isn't necessarily being the best, it's to be differentiated. To offer help that other people don't have, that fits some unique need in the marketplace that other people aren't fulfilling. And that differentiation creates, instead of a zero sum, creates what we call a positive sum or P-sum game. And that positive sum game means anybody can create a positive new value without having to compete or take it away from someone else. That means less people vying to slug it out to be at the top or the best, and rather just spend time being differentiated, offering some unique helpfulness in the marketplace that nobody's offering right now. That positive sum game is so positive that rather than having this race to the bottom where everybody's just competing on price or limited resources, instead that differentiation can actually create a bump up in price. Now remember we talked earlier where revenues feed egos and profits feed families? Well, in this case, differentiated can oftentimes mean more profit. Why? Because everybody slugging out over here doesn't offer this unique value. Maybe that's personalization, maybe that's customer service, maybe that's a certain type of help or product or widget that you have that has a unique capability that isn't found in these. And that is competitive strategy. Which brings us to the second power category of strategy, which is adaptive strategy. Now, when we're talking about adaptive strategy, what we mean is, remember that plan that we showed from how to get from here to there in the future? And it just shows this perfectly clean line and everything going just fine. It's kind of like the plays that coaches put up in football games on the chalkboard. Do you know what all the plays on the chalkboard seem to have in common? They all seem to lead to touchdowns or success. But in fact, when the ball gets snapped during a play, it doesn't really go that way. So even if you have this clean path that looks great on paper, a lot of people are reporting that what it feels like when they get going is a lot more like this, like many memes you see on the internet. The reality is that this is just chaos in the middle, and I don't find that the plans have to work out that way either. And that's where adaptive strategy comes in. It recognizes that if you're good with the strategic objective, and you know you're starting from here, you're going to get some things wrong on the way to getting them right. Adaptive strategy feels much more like this to me, where at the beginning, when you get something wrong, it's off by a lot. And and you try to course correct, and then it's off by a lot again. And as you start to course correct, little by little, your course corrections aren't as large until eventually you start to tighten in on that final objective. And that's really the key of adaptive strategy, is you're going to get some stuff wrong on the way to getting it right, but the idea is as you make those swings, they get tighter and tighter and tighter as you go, and eventually you close in on the objective. That's how adaptive strategy feels to me. Not like some perfectly straight line, and not like some chaos bubble in the middle, but rather continuing to refine as you go. And now let's get to the third power category, dominant strategy. Dominant strategy comes from, in economics, what's known as game theory. And dominant strategy means any strategy that has the greatest likelihood of success, regardless of whatever happens next. What's cool about that is that when you don't know what happens next, or you're not sure what to do, dominant strategies are usually your best bet. Here's an example my teacher Toby used when he taught me about dominant strategy. So this example right here, depending on your age, you might see this as a hashtag, but really what I mean is as a game of tic-tac-toe. So if you're playing a game of tic-tac-toe and you get to go first, and you get to place that X, where do you place it and you don't know where that O is going to go next? Place it in the center. Why? Because as a dominant strategy, it doesn't just give you one way to win or two ways to win, it actually gives you 4 ways to win. So you don't know where that O is going to go next, you just know that wherever they go, they're going to leave you the most chances for a win because you took the X in the center. Because if, for example, you try to put the XA in a corner spot like this, you only get 3 outs. If, let's say, you put it in a T spot like this, you only get 2 outs. So this is a really important strategy when trying to figure out what to do in situations. Always look to the dominant strategy, that X in the middle, in whatever you do when you're not sure what's going to happen next. And that's the skipping stones version of these 3 power categories of strategy: competitive strategy, adaptive strategy, and dominant strategy. So as you start to work with these, you'll find they run really deep. And if it could be of any use, I've got a couple books on the subject that might be helpful for you if you want to go a little further in it. Arguably the godfather of all competitive strategy, like what Peter Drucker is to management or Milton Friedman is to economics, you're going to find is probably Michael Porter. And he's got lots of books out there, and you could try any of them. They're all really amazing on competitive strategy. But this one in particular, Understanding Michael Porter, which was not written by Michael Porter, but rather by someone who worked closely with him that he authorized to give this account, is one of the ones I found the most helpful for getting oriented to competitive strategy as a full discourse. The second one has to do with that component of competitive strategy I talked about, that differentiation. That part where you offer that unique differentiation, that unique help in the marketplace that nobody else is helping with, you might be able to fetch a premium or charge more rather than be in a race to the bottom on pricing. Well, if you want to know places to differentiate, there are so many ways to innovate. But oftentimes people start to think, I don't know how to think of all the ways to innovate. And I found this book extremely helpful for that. It's called The 10 Types of Innovation. Literally 10 categories of how to innovate in whatever your business is, all the way from internal process into client-facing experiences and everything in between. There are oodles of books on competitive strategy. These are just 2 of the ones that I've found incredibly helpful that are on my bookshelf. And if you wanted to grab them, feel free. I've even included some affiliate Amazon links down below if you want to click through on those. None of us in our careers or in our teams or in our enterprises wants to be like that bridge I showed you at the beginning, where when the river moves, you can't move with it. Strategy is going to be the key. And if you like this video, feel free to like, subscribe, or share. And until next time, set NēXTpectations. Oh, thank you so much. I just could never have been this awesome without you. You're just the best. Thanks for everything and helping to make me as awesome as I am.